So news from around the world. We go to Peru, right? Peru, that's South American country. Peru's president tried to dissolve Congress. By day's end, he was arrested. Lima, it was a day on which much of Peru was focused on Congress, where an impeachment vote was planned against the president on corruption charges. But shortly before noon, the Peruvian leader addressed the country in a surprise televised address. He announced the dissolution of Congress and the installation of an emergency government, stunning political leaders across the spectrum, including his own allies, by effectively trying to carry out what was widely condemned as an attempted coup to cling to power. Government officials resigned en masse. The top court declared the move unconstitutional, and the country's armed forces and the national police issued a joint statement suggesting they would not support him. By day's end, Pedro Castillo, 53, was ousted from power and under arrest. His vice president was sworn in as president and became the first woman to lead Peru. It was a cinematic conclusion to Castillo's presidency, the first leftist to be elected Peru's president in more than a generation. The former farmer, teacher, and union activist had campaigned last year on a pledge to transform the ailing economy and reverse the high rates of poverty among rural Peruvians, which had worsened during the pandemic. But his attempt to seize power echoed a similar move by former President Alberto Fujimori 30 years ago. Like Castillo, Fujimori was a populist outsider and was elected democratically in 1990. 2 years later, he staged a coup to shut down Congress with the support of the military and ruled as a dictator until 2000. He is now in prison on charges of corruption and human rights abuses. But Peru has continued to be convulsed by years of high-level corruption scandals, resulting in 6 presidents since 2016. Twice before, during Castillo's 16 months in power, Congress has tried to oust him, but failed to garner enough votes for an impeachment. Sounds familiar, yeah? Sounds familiar, Washington? Twice they tried to impeach, but didn't garner enough votes to oust him. Sounds like somebody we're familiar with. Castillo was one of several leftists in Latin America who had been swept into power by voters disillusioned by the establishment and fed up with decades of inequality, high unemployment, and an elite political class tainted by years of corruption and infighting. But he appeared uninterested in making good on his campaign promises, and was quickly confronted by a cascading stream of obstacles that paralyzed his administration, including high-level corruption scandals, criminal investigations, and cabinet turnover. Castillo churned through more than 80 ministers and filled many posts with political allies lacking relevant experience, some of whom have faced investigations for corruption, domestic violence, and murder. Prosecutors accuse him of leading a criminal organization with lawmakers and family members to profit off government contract and of repeatedly obstructing justice, sometimes seemingly in plain view, such as when his daughter disappeared from the presidential palace as she faced arrest, and his office later claimed that footage that would have captured the movement went missing. The president's approval rating slumped to 19% in Lima, though in rural areas it remained at 45%, which still is not a lot, just 4 percentage points lower than a year ago, according to polls last month by the Institute of Peruvian Studies. Congress scheduled a third impeachment vote last week after Castillo threatened to dissolve Congress last month. It was just 2 hours before that vote when Castillo announced the dissolution of Congress and the installation of an emergency government to rule by decree, while also imposing an immediate national curfew. We have taken the decision to establish an emergency government to re-establish the rule of law and democracy, to which effect the following measures are dictated: to dissolve Congress temporarily, to install a government of exceptional emergency, to call to the shortest term possible to elections for a new Congress, with the ability to draft a new constitution, Castillo said. Castillo's declaration plunged a fragile democracy into its biggest political crisis in years. Twice, Congress had tried to oust Castillo from power, but failed to garner enough votes for an impeachment. But it quickly became apparent that his announcement had little support, prompting the mass resignation of many of his top cabinet members, a fire hose of denunciations from political opponents and constitutional experts, and a joint statement from the armed forces and the police suggesting that he lacked any legal right to carry out his decree. We reject the breaking of constitutional order, and we urge the population to respect the political constitution, remain calm, and trust state institutions, the police later said in a separate statement. The U.S. Embassy in Lima also condemned Castillo. The United States emphatically urges President Castillo to reverse his attempt to close Congress and allow democratic institutions in Peru to work accordingly to the Constitution, the embassy said in a tweet. We encourage the Peruvian public to stay calm during this uncertain time. The president's declaration seemed to shock even Castillo's closest allies. I am a defender of the democratic order, of the Constitution, and I am deeply convinced that politics cannot be above the law. Benji Espinosa, who was the president's personal lawyer until he resigned Wednesday, told RPP, a local radio station. Castillo has seemingly been considering such a move for some time. Last month, he publicly threatened to dissolve Congress and had quietly tried to survey military leaders about supporting him, according to local media outlets. After his defense minister resigned Saturday, citing personal reasons, rumors of a military coup in favor of and against Castillo went viral on social media, leading some opposition lawmakers to stay the night in Congress on Sunday for fear of a violent attempt by the armed forces to close the chamber. No such attempt was made. By Tuesday, the head of Peru's army had also resigned, citing personal reasons. On Wednesday, just 2 hours after Castillo's announcement, Congress convened and voted to impeach the president. Lawmakers voted 101 to 6 with 10 abstentions to remove him from power. He was seen leaving the presidential palace in a car that later entered a police station, and on Wednesday night, which was yesterday, the prosecutor's office said it had directed his arrest on charges of rebellion. Shortly after the congressional vote, Vice President Dina Boluarte was sworn in as Peru's new leader. It's up to us to talk, to engage in dialogue, to reach agreements, she said after she was sworn in before lawmakers who applauded and cheered her. I asked for time to rescue our country from corruption and incompetence within the government. Boluarte, 60, called for a truce between Peru's political parties in order to re-establish national unity and return the country to a path of economic growth. A former lawyer and a member of a Marxist political party until she was pushed out last year for criticizing the party leader. Boluarte ran on Castillo's ticket last year. She served as both his vice president and his Minister of Development and Social Inclusion, but resigned from the ministry after the president formed his last cabinet last month. Boluarte is not particularly well known, and in recent poll, Peruvians favored new general elections over her replacing Castillo in office in a scenario in which he was impeached. Former President Martin Vizcarra, the only Peruvian leader to be successfully ousted before Castillo, left office after the vote in 2020, but filed an appeal before the Constitutional Tribunal, which declined to weigh in on its legality. The next president lasted less than a week in office, and his successor governed Peru for the next 8 months until Castillo took office. So there you have it, folks. Down in Peru, the president of Peru had tried to dissolve Congress after they decided that he be brought up in corruptions, and they attempted to impeach him, but there wasn't enough votes to remove him from office. Sounds like something like back in 2021, when we had a run on Capitol Hill, when the former president was still in office, and under urging, he urged people, to go home, we love you, and so forth, that kind of stuff. You see, but at least Peru has the balls to charge him, to charge him with some kind of obstruction or insurrection or what have you. Unlike the United States of America, which is like wasting a lot of time playing around with this man who has, what do you call it there? He has documents that are classified that nobody else should be seeing. Just yesterday in the news, some more documents were found in a storage room. All this kind of stuff going on, So Peru operates under the rule of law, according to this article. The rule of law, and the military didn't go along with him. You see, that's where the problem comes in. If the military say, yeah, we're going to go along with you. And then he was a leftist too. That's another issue. Maybe if he were a right-wing politician, those are the more, famous and notorious in South America, then it might have been different. Like in Chile, the general back there, you go back in time in Argentina, they had some right-wing leaders that served as president. But for some reason, I guess if you're a leftist, you're not gonna get the military to back you. That's probably his downfall. He was a leftist. He was not a right-wing politician.